Well, hey Andrew, thank you so much for joining us today for this
Hey,
podcast.
sure. Happy to be here.
Yeah, so I thought we'll start with the beginning. When did your sleep problems start happening, and what were they like? Was it more like difficulty falling asleep, or difficulty like sort of like waking up in the middle of the night and being unable to go back to sleep?
Sure. I think I've been having sleep problems since as long as I can remember. Especially at least since college. They've always mainly been trouble falling asleep. Over the years, like that problem would just build upon itself where at first I couldn't get to sleep and then I'd start worrying about not getting to sleep. So I wouldn't even want to try to get to sleep. That obviously left me staying up way too late at night, making it hard to wake up in the morning. In college, morning classes were a struggle, and once you get into the real world, your bosses are even less forgiving as far as showing up late. Yeah, it's always been a struggle since I can remember.
Oh yeah, totally. I think like just the sort of like secondary effects of it, like work and all of that gets so deeply affected by that. Was there any distinct moment that you remember where your sleep problems started, or do you think it was just like sort of gradual where it got harder and harder to fall asleep?
Yeah, I can't really think of a moment. It's just, uh, I mean, I, I think it's like kind of normal in your teenage years maybe to stay up late and sleep till noon, but I just never seem to grow out of that. Even through like different attempts, since college and beyond, I'd be able to kind of maybe like reset for a month or so, but it just got harder and harder to stick to that, um, like wake up, go to sleep schedule.
I see. Yeah. And did you usually have things like racing thoughts and stuff when you'd lie down in bed, you'd start thinking about other things, unable to sort of like switch off?
Yeah, unable to, it definitely, not all the time, but that definitely happened. Sometimes I'd find myself just worrying about things that were really ridiculous, but you couldn't get out of your head at that time. Even sometimes I'd definitely falling asleep, and then even sometimes just like waking up maybe a couple hours before you normally would, and then like start worrying about stuff coming up that day and losing more sleep as a result. But sometimes it's just like complete inability to fall asleep, even when there wasn't anything to be worrying out about at the time.
Yeah, yeah, that sounds very difficult. Was there anything you tried in particular that helped like alleviate it, like meditation or any exercises?
Yeah, I've been through like all the over the counter stuff. Um, I had been Unisom was the one that was mostly working for me, but that always made it impossible to wake up the next morning. You just kind of like felt hungover
Yeah.
on that. There's like the other one, um, like the Tylenol Simply Sleep, I think, but that seemed to stop working pretty quickly. Um, Even like the Unisom, it wasn't like guaranteed. There's still that anxiety there. Maybe it won't work. It's just like in general, depending on having something, you travel and forget it, or you realize, like you took the last one the night before. So definitely imperfect solutions.
Oh yeah, totally. And did you ever feel like you built up tolerance to them really quickly? I know you said with the one of the pills, like it was working for a bit and then it kind of stopped working.
Yeah, for sure. I think it was a Simply Sleep, and even reading online, it said you build up tolerance within like 3 days. So not very useful. And they all on the packages they say not for long-term use. So you kind of worry like what you're doing to your health by taking these um, for extended period of time when they're not supposed to be taken that way.
And how did that basically make you feel? Like, obviously, this is something that's bothered you for quite a while, and you've tried certain solutions, and it doesn't seem like any of them work. Did that increase the anxiety?
Yeah, I think it just overall kind of had a negative impact on like my own self-esteem. Like you can't wake up in the morning, and I think like waking up in the morning is tied to like this image of like motivation and like productivity. So you're feeling down on yourself as it is, and it just kind of like nudges you towards sort of this like depressive cycle, I guess, where like you're not sleeping the way you want to be, and that makes you depressed, and then like the depression can kind of make your sleep schedule even worse.
Yeah, totally. And I think it's sort of like this cycle that feeds into each other, right? You start worrying about the fact that you're not waking up more early, and then you kind of put this pressure on yourself to like sleep better that affects your sleep and kind of feeds back into that anxiety, right? Did
Yep.
you ever feel like you had this internal pressure of like, oh yeah, I slept poorly last night. I'm not waking up in the morning. I have to force myself to kind of sleep.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, that was even played into it more like if you're trying to fall asleep and you're not falling asleep for like an hour, and now you're worrying like I'm gonna feel awful the next day. I mean, I just dreaded days where I wasn't getting a good night's sleep because I knew I just feel like awful. I can barely function. Um, so yeah, I mean, it was just like on top of everything else, just then like having that pressure of now I'm gonna feel terrible the next day.
Yeah, and do you think that was actually true? Like you're like that the next day went like pretty badly because you didn't have a great night's sleep?
Yeah, I mean, well, now, I mean, it's kind of like skipping ahead here, but I mean, after starting like the CBT-I, I think that was like one of the first things I realized, because like initially I was starting out on like 6 hours of sleep, but I mean, I was feeling fine the next day, like waking up easily. I was like able to run in the morning, like work. I mean, definitely got tired. Earlier than I was used to. But I mean, I was still working more or less full days and getting in like my normal amount of exercise. So I mean, I think that was definitely an important thing to realize early on, that just because you didn't get um, the amount of sleep that you wanted to the night before, like it doesn't mean your next day is necessarily going to be awful.
Yep, totally. And yeah, since you brought up CBTI, I think one of the most important things that a sort of a good CBTI program teaches you is to challenge these beliefs, right? The belief that I'm predisposed to never being able to sleep. My day will be terribly affected if I don't get enough sleep. Like when you start challenging these, and I think like you said, I slept 6 hours a night, and then I woke up the next day, and I actually felt pretty energetic. And that's sort of like building confidence towards the opposite of a preconceived notion that you have that you need a lot of sleep in order to function really well, right?
Right.
Yeah, and I think that's sort of interesting. And I guess we could sort of move into like what's been working for you. Like have has your sleep improved recently?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, my sleep has massively improved. And so I think I'm a little over 3 weeks into this. I mean, I've had 2 nights where it's been trouble falling asleep, which is like, I mean, it was at least 3 to 5 times a week before this.
Oh,
I mean, I was regularly waking up at least 3 times during the night. I mean, I've started noticing a big improvement in this, like even just over the past 5 days or so. I mean, I had 2 nights where I slept the entire night through. So I mean, there's been huge improvements in um, both falling asleep a lot faster and easier, and then not waking up so many times during the night.
that's fantastic. I'm really happy to hear that. And what's really cool is you've done any of this without taking any like sleeping aids or anything along the way, right?
Right. Yep. I mean, it was like I mean, I've been trying to improve like the whole sleep hygiene thing too. And I mean, even before it was like I would make sure I always had like a couple beers before bed because that seemed to at least help. But I mean, and there's more anxiety around that. Like, well, if I don't like have a beer before bed, like I'm not going to be able to fall asleep. But I mean, I've been able to cut that out completely. And I mean, if anything, like it's gotten easier to fall asleep and stay asleep.
That's awesome. And how does that like basically how are you feeling now that your sleep is able to sort of improve in that way?
I mean, I definitely feel a lot better. I mean, just in general. I mean, being like I have my wake up time at 6 a.m. now, so it's like um, having a get my run in, like having an hour or two of work, like before I would have woken up normally before is like a very good feeling. And I mean, I think just like in general, it kind of helps you look more. I think it gives you like a better handle on how you're organizing your day, even because I mean, before if I didn't feel productive during the day, I was just like, well, it's because my sleep was terrible and like I woke up too late and didn't get anything done. But now like that excuse is kind of removed, so I feel like it's given me like this other jumping off point um, to like find other ways where I can be more efficient and productive with how I'm using my time throughout the day.
That's great. Do you think that certain beliefs about sleep and these sort of like this anxiety and these racing thoughts that you had before, have they sort of decreased?
Yeah, I mean, I mean, another thing I did like start using Headspace too, which I think has helped. Just like learning the very basic technique of kind of like trying not to get obsessed with thoughts as they pass through your head, like has helped just with getting to sleep in general too. So I mean, before I let myself get wrapped up in like whether it was worrying about something coming up or something that just happened, now trying to like apply those same techniques when I'm laying in bed um, to try to avoid like those racing thoughts and anxiety that used to keep me awake.
Very cool. Do you only go to bed when you're very sleepy now? Do you follow a sort of like regiment where, you basically stay away from, like sleeping and stuff unless your body tells you to? You're never
Right.
forcing yourself to sleep, basically.
Yeah, I mean, I think so far it's pretty much lined up with kind of like my sleep window. Um, I think part of it is just getting into a better routine in like the last few hours of your day as well. So I mean, I've definitely been trying to make a concerted effort. I mean, it's still like a work in progress, but like trying to make sure I'm not, like working 15 minutes until I should be in bed, like not watching TV or using screens. So I mean, I think that's helped a long way too. And I mean, I think sometimes if you're like you can work up until bedtime, you don't even realize you're tired. But like if you start getting into kind of like this pre-sleep routine, um, that's helped a lot too.
Awesome. What in the app particularly would you say has helped you a lot?
Yeah, I mean, I like the how easy it is to log the sleep and then to like see that to get the sleep efficiency number right away, to see the graph, how I'm improving over time, and like since I started, like it's every week, like it's definitely an upward trend. Um, and then like I do, there's like the support group, so it's cool to be able to see like kind of other people and just kind of openly talking about it. Um, but I mean, I think overall it just kind of helps set that like reinforce a routine of like logging your sleep every morning. Um, so it's definitely just a way of staying accountable because like if you, um, uh, I mean, if you wake up later than you're supposed to, like you're going to have to enter that in the app. Um, and like it's just kind of like that extra step that makes you um, a little more motivated to stick with this schedule.
Yeah. And on nights where even now, I'm sure, like even after improving your sleep so much, I think you mentioned that there were a couple of nights where maybe things didn't go really well. Do you feel the same sort of like magnitude of anxiety that you felt before when you can't sleep, or is that something you think you've basically like beaten at this point?
Right. No, I mean, I think that another thing that's been helpful is just this technique of, I mean, if you can't fall asleep, not like laying in bed for the next 2 hours, but rather getting out and doing something else, which is not something I would have ever done before. And I mean, it almost seems like counterintuitive because you're worried you're going to wake yourself up even further. But I mean, that's been a technique. And like the couple nights that I've had trouble falling asleep or falling back asleep, I mean, that's been like a major help. Just getting out of bed and like I would listen to like a not very exciting podcast for 20 minutes, and I mean that definitely helped get me back to sleep. And I'm almost certain I got back to sleep a lot faster doing that than had I just stayed laying in bed the whole time.
Yeah, one of the things that is sort of like pushed in cognitive behavioral therapy is associations. So when you start, spending a lot of time in bed awake, turning and tossing, you're actually building up this sort of like anxiety related to your bed and your sleep. The way I like to sort of think of it is like performance anxiety, right? It's like you go up on stage, you give a speech, it didn't go very well. Now, every time in the future, you're so nervous about going up and kind of speaking in public because it's been reinforced that things will go badly.
All
I
right.
think similarly, you sort of start associating your bedroom environment and your bed with anxiety and not sleep. And that's basically performance anxiety accrued over many nights of sleeping poorly, right? And I think one of the things that you've been able to do by sort of getting out of bed and whenever you feel like you're turning and tossing for too long, getting out of there is sort of reinforce it the other way, being like, hey, when I'm anxious, I'm not in bed. I'm actually out of bed. I'm only in bed when I'm sleepy. And I think you had mentioned earlier when your sleep started to turn, um, how you started seeing improvements, and that's like positive reinforcement, right? You're kind of teaching your body that, hey, I can sleep fine. I don't need the 2 beers that I needed
Right.
before. And it's this sort of uh, classic like conditioning where you're teaching yourself that sleep is something that comes naturally.
Yep, for sure. And I mean, I think just in the past week too, I've been feeling that a lot. Just like normally where I'd feel the anxiety starting of not being able to fall asleep, and then it quickly goes away. And like the next thing I know, like I fell asleep in like 5 or 10 minutes, which never happened before.
Um, so yeah, now that you're sort of seeing this improvement in your sleep, and you're not worrying a lot about it compared to what you were before, what would you tell someone that was in your shoes maybe a few months ago, where very anxious about sleep and just difficulties falling asleep in general?
Yep. I mean, I would just say that I would take advantage of like this unique time we're in with the quarantine, and sort of we don't have all these social commitments we had before, so it makes it pretty easy to keep up a regular wake time even through the weekends. So I mean, that was kind of the impetus for me, and it's definitely been a huge help. So I'd say like give it a try now and take advantage of like this unique period we're in to make an improvement.
That's great advice. I think this is a good time, like you said, without a lot of schedules and stuff, to sort of sit down and fix your sleep.
Yep, for sure.
Well, thank you so much for giving me your time, Andrew. It's great
Yep,
to have you.
great talk. Thanks.
Yeah. Bye.